when we hide behind our phones or we put down other people or use contemptuous language, we create this system where we're not united as youth. And I think having collaboration and compromise is how the future is brighter.
An experience I had a couple of months ago where a club on campus organized a debate, or we were debating immigration. And they had a very set format. It was a formal debate. We had a moderator. We weren't actually listening to each other. So many people were rolling their eyes at the things that other people said. Once you hit a contemptuous space, one of the first things is you're splitting. It's not a we situation, it's an us and them.
There's moments where we push for a world of dignity, but we don't hold our friends accountable when they're being contemptuous. And it's the level of like, when you're throwing contempt at me or my loved ones, I will react. But when my loved ones throw contempt at you, I'm going to turn a blind eye.
I really think contempt breeds contempt. When our dignity is violated, then it's easy and almost justified, or feels like we can justify responding with contempt. And so it's just contempt, contempt, contempt. Somebody has to be the one to take a step back and be like, I am going to respond with dignity.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Courageous Conversations about our schools. This is your host, Ken Futernick, and today my guests are all students. I talk a lot with teachers, administrators, school board members, lawmakers, authors of books, but not enough with students to get their perspectives on really important and sometimes complex subjects like the one we'll be talking about today: how people treat one another and whether one can or should try to regard others, especially the ones whose views we really don't like, with dignity rather than contempt. One of the people I spoke with recently on this podcast was Tim Shriver. He's a former teacher. He's headed up the Special Olympics International and also created something that's being used by politicians, but also by educators in schools, called the Dignity Index. Since my guests are all part of something called Students for Dignity, I'll be asking them about the index a little later in this idea of dignity over contempt. So let's start by meeting our guests. We have several of them online today. Preston, let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here. My name's Preston Brightwell. I'm a field director for the Dignity Index Project and was a co-founder of the Students for Dignity back when I was a student.
And you're located where, Preston?
I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Okay, great. Alexa, I'm going to come to you next.
Thanks, Ken. I'm Alexa Merrill. I'm a senior at Brigham Young University and a student ambassador for the Dignity Index. I'm located in Provo, Utah.
Great. Thank you, Alexa. Great to have you with us. David, tell us about yourself a little bit.
Yeah, I'm David Witt, and just last month I finished my Master of Public Administration degree. I am also a Dignity Ambassador, but was involved in student leadership at the University of Utah for our student group.
Terrific. And next I want to have you, Iradukunda Esperance. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. And tell us about yourself and where you go to school.
Thank you so much. And yes, that was correct. My name is Iradukunda Esperance, and I'm a recent graduate from the University of Utah, and I am also a Student for Dignity Ambassador.
Terrific. And last we have Devasena Menakandan. I hope I pronounced it right. And you are not in Utah. You're going to school elsewhere. Tell us about yourself a little bit.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Devasena Manikandan. I am currently a freshman at the University of Iowa, and I'm majoring in economics and data science on the pre-law track. And I'm also an ambassador for Students for Dignity.
It's great to have you all with us. Preston, I'm going to start with you and have you share with me and our listeners what Students for Dignity is all about. I'll have you start, since you really founded that organization, and then any of the others can add to what Preston says after that. But Preston?
So Students for Dignity really came from the inspiration and I think the spirit that the Dignity Index project brings. So Tim, like you mentioned, who you previously talked to, launched a pilot project around the Dignity Index to test it. And I was one of those students that was part of that original project, along with one of my colleagues, Madeline Jones. And we came out of that project just, wow, we were inspired. Look at all the conversations we were able to have because of that tool. We need to keep this going. And that really was the genesis of Students for Dignity. We wanted other students to have the same experience that we had had. And that kind of evolved into what is now becoming the student movement around Students for Dignity. And it really is just about using the principles that the Dignity Index teaches. The scale helps us understand and empower students to use it on their campuses to have difficult conversations and hopefully get to this point where our default interaction or our default is to default to dignity and not contempt when we're in difficult conversations. And we just really saw universities as being a really important place for that to happen, and students to have that tool.
I wonder, have you thought about, or does it if high school students are listening to it, do you invite them to participate, or is there a way for younger students before they get into college to participate?
Yeah, at an organizational level, we're actually expanding out a lot of what we learned from the college application of Students for Dignity, and we're taking it into the high school space and the K through 12 space. So our K through 12 lead and the parts of our organization that are working on that are currently adapting what we've kind of been doing to be more approachable for high school students. But I know Devasena came to us as a high school student with a collaboration we did with an organization where she's from. And so we're definitely making inroads in that space as well.
Yeah, I think back on I was a teacher educator, and thinking back to the kinds of things that we teach teachers to do to try to promote, even at very young ages, in kindergarten, to be kind to others, to share, don't take other people's things. And maybe one day there will be a chapter or an organization called Dignity for Tots, or
Okay, awesome. Todd's Dignity.
Todd's Dignity. Yeah. And those of us who are older, like myself, you could have a group for seniors, because I think some of us get sort of curmudgeonly and old crusty, and we throw our hands up in the air. And the message that I think you're going to be talking about here can apply to virtually everyone. But I'm just really excited to hear, and I think our listeners will be, what dignity, how it plays out for students, and in this case, for college and high school students. So I'm going to go around and ask each of you to say just a bit about why you decided to get involved, to become ambassadors, to become involved with Students for Dignity, and what was it that attracted you to it, and what is it that you see is it as its potential? Alexa, let me start with you.
For sure. I am one of the newer ambassadors to the program. I've been with the Dignity Index since last summer, so it's longer than feels like it was just yesterday. At school, I spend a lot of time thinking about how I want to be better and what I value. And I just so happened to be talking to someone about my values, and I had been thinking through them, and I had landed on this term that I said, shared dignity. I said, I value shared dignity. And she said, have you heard of the Dignity Index? And I said, no, what is that? And so I pulled it up, found the tag that said Students for Dignity, and immediately emailed Preston and said, I don't know what this is, but I want to be involved. And the rest is history, I guess. So I was just a volunteer for a while. I helped with some of the programs that the Dignity Index has been doing, and then got to be an ambassador and have been trying to bring the Dignity Index onto Brigham Young University campus ever since.
Great. We'll come back and probe a little more deeply about the flip side of dignity, which is contempt, and how that has played out, because I suspect you're brushing up against that is also one of the things that that prompted you to get involved. Devasena, I want to ask you to talk a bit about why you decided to get involved with Students for Dignity.
Growing up, I had my family and I talked a lot about political issues, and we often got heated, and at times we would get upset with each other, and then we'd have to like reconvene, say sorry to each other after our like rude jabs and stuff. And in high school, I did organizations like Iowa Youth Congress. It's an organization that unites young people across the state and enables them to advocate for issues youth face. And through that program, I learned about the Students for Dignity program. And I was immediately drawn to it because it talked about something that I saw so much in my life. I think sometimes when I was talking with people, I would speak with contempt, or like I got into this idea of, oh, I got to prove my point. And I thought it was just like so interesting how well worded that program put in what so many of us needed. And I don't know, I just fell in love with it.
Mm-hmm. Terrific. Ira, I'm going to come to you now and have you talk about what it was that prompted you to get involved.
I feel like initially what prompted me, because I also worked on the pilot in 2022, but it stemmed from like the contempt that my family like received from back home, from their country, and the level of the contempt and my dad's push for dignity as a family ship and as a household, and being on campus and receiving contempt and pushing contempt and trying to pull dignity back. But the level of engaging was already pushed aside. So when Morgan was like, oh, here's this project. Do you want to do it? I was like, oh my gosh, yes. So once I joined it and I loved it. I loved it. So then after that, I was like, hey, Tammy, can I please come back? Can I please come back? And after that, I've been coming back and I seriously love it because I think, especially on campus, I don't think we realize how much contempt is pushed. So being on that project really has taught me like for the push for dignity. So I think that was my initial attraction to like joining the dignity movement.
Yeah, well, I'm going to have a bunch of questions to probe deeper into this because it's, I think people out there listening say it really sounds wonderful. It sounds nice. But it's got to be harder than it sounds. And so we're gonna probe that in a minute. But David, I want to hear from you next. What were your reasons for getting involved with Students for Dignity?
Before I say why I went into the Students for Dignity or got involved with it, I went into my graduate program because I think policy is important. But I quickly learned that it's hard to have conversations with lots of different people with different opinions that turn into stalemates or disgust. And then I heard about this pilot project that Preston and Ira talked about, and that's what I was looking for, wanting to help people be able to stand up for their convictions and beliefs, but still have a conversation and see the good that the other side can bring to the table. I think before that, though, I was wanting something like this. In the 2016 and 2020 elections, I had a lot of conversations with family members and friends that were fueled by a lot of frustration and contempt from me for sure, and from both sides.
Yeah, the fact that there's an index and there's 8 levels of the index suggests that it's not just sort of a binary thing. It's not either you're showing regarding others with dignity or contempt. It's there's levels of it, some are more subtle than others. So some at the very extreme ends of the index, it's pretty obvious what it is. But there are times when you can be in the middle zone of the index and realize, oh, there actually was an element of contempt there. So we're going to come back and have you talk about the index a little later. But I want to talk a little bit about this, how you have experienced contempt in your lives, particularly in school settings, because you're all students, and there's a lot of educators listening in, and hopefully other students. But what is for those who haven't been in school recently, for some, when we went to school, there wasn't social media. We didn't carry phones around. Uh, uh, Life was different. And so I just wonder if each of you could talk a little bit about, and not all of you have to respond to this, but how do you experience and witness and hear contempt in your lives as students? Alexa, I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
When you were talking, Ken, a second ago about how it's not a binary system, it's not just you're treating someone with contempt or just treating someone with dignity. It reminded me of an experience I had a couple of months ago where a club on campus organized a debate, or we were debating immigration. And they had a very set format. It was a formal debate. We had a moderator. There were probably 200 people in the room. And one of the parts of the debate was that you could volunteer to state your opinion in this structured way. So you would address the chairman, and then you would state your opinion, and you'd have a short amount of time, and you'd follow these rules. But that room was filled with tension the whole time. And because I knew the dignity index, and because I've been involved with Students for Dignity, was able to notice that tension came from contempt. That we weren't, even though you were saying nice things and like stating your opinion in like a polite way, you weren't technically trampling over people's opinions. Everyone technically had the opportunity to say what they felt was important. We weren't actually listening to each other. So many people were rolling their eyes at the things that other people said. We were confronting people on, like, people were saying like, well, the speaker doesn't believe that people are, they were coming up with all these contemptuous statements and ultimately weren't listening. And that, was indicated where people weren't actually following the rules of the format of the debate. And so I knew that people were stuck in their head thinking about what they wanted to say, because they're like, I know better than the person who's talking, so I'm not even actually paying attention to the format or what I'm supposed to say or what they're saying, because I already know that I'm better than them. And that is one of the first, once you hit a contemptuous space, one of the first things is you're splitting. It's not a we situation, it's an us and them. And then the further down into contempt you go, it becomes us versus them, and then us or them. And so that room was just filled with an us versus them energy. And it was really discouraging, because it was a really cool opportunity to come together and hear people's different opinions on this issue that we don't talk about on campuses. And I think most people left feeling more frustrated than when they came in.
Yeah, one thing you said that caught my attention was it wasn't just that I think my idea about immigration is better. I think I'm better than you. And that's where, implicit in that, if that's what you were feeling and that's what others were feeling, that falls into the lower half of the dignity index, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Davis, Sena, let me ask you, what's your experience with contempt? You alluded to it a little bit before about your own family discussions and how it would creep into those controversial subjects. But how about as a student? Where have you witnessed it? What does it look like and feel like?
I think one thing you mentioned about how it's so much different now because we have social media and we can say anything we want and hide behind our phones. I think that combined with how Alexa said, it's almost like people are trying to prove a point and they think they're better than the other person. I think something that I experienced was people would often post about like their political views or views on a certain class, or whether it be a clothing trend or whatever it may be, they would use such contemptuous language and would put down other people in a way that made it seem like, oh, my views are right and yours are wrong from the get-go. So closing off any discussion. And
Mhm.
so whenever my peers or people who did not agree with that person saw them around campus, they would immediately step away from them. They would distance themselves, and there would be this creation of like tension, and people couldn't really collaborate with each other or like really understand each other or even get to know each other on a deeper level because I think everyone's perspectives are different. We all come from different backgrounds and have different experiences. So when we hide behind our phones or we put down other people or use contemptuous language, I think we just shut down almost. And we create this system where we're not united as youth. And I think having collaboration and compromise is how the future is brighter. So I was a little drawn to the Dignity Index to create this idea of compromise and making sure that we're not being people who think, oh, I'm better, or oh, your views are wrong and mine are right. It's about, oh, okay, here are my experiences. What are yours? And let's find a common ground.
One of the questions I'm going to pose to all of you in just a little bit is how your colleagues, your classmates, and others that you've interacted with and shared this idea of a dignity index and why it's important, how they respond to it, whether they, like you, all of you said, this immediately resonated for me. I want to be part of it. I suspect not everybody you've shared it with reacts exactly that way. So we'll come back to that in a minute. But David, I want to ask you how what contempt looks like in school settings. And I just, and one thing you might address is, have you ever experienced something in school, and it could have been in high school or it's university, where people express something in a class in response to a question a teacher might pose, and the reaction among other students is contemptuous, or it may be in a subtle way. It's laughing or sneering, um, or shaking their heads or raised eyebrows. Have you had that experience?
Not to me personally, but I have sat in classes where somebody's giving a presentation or somebody raises their hand again, and there's this eye roll of, oh, they're talking again, or whatever. So, yeah, I have seen that type of contempt. And I have also seen contempt during my undergrad. I took several behavioral science classes, and a lot of peers and uh, classes talked about how we need to be more inclusive, more voices at the table, talk to and about different people. But then, similar to what Alexa and Devasana have said, of like, accept those people. And I'm like, I agree with a lot of things that you're saying, but those other people are my friends or my parents. And so I saw some of that contempt embedded in this culture of wanting to have more conversations with more people and get more people at the table. But it was also creating this contempt and division when it's not actually everybody contributing to the conversation.
David, has it been hard for you to make this shift into your efforts to become more regard others with dignity rather than contempt? Has it been challenging for you, or did the shift come pretty easily?
I think it's been a challenge. Arthur Brooks talks about being addicted to a culture of contempt. And so it's taken a long time, but being conscious of it and uh, having that at the forefront of my mind of like, oh, that was contemptuous, or that eye roll was contemptuous. How am I talking about somebody else? Is that, this is they have a right to be heard as well. So it has taken quite a bit of consciousness and practice, which I think is okay if you're changing a culture. Within myself, that it does take some time and it does take practice.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that, Ira. I want to hear what you have to say about contempt and how it's had an effect, or how you have seen it and witnessed it and felt it and maybe even been there yourself at times?
I think for me, I see it like in a different lens because the first time I experienced like contempt in a college ground was from like a professor and like their power of like wanting to be higher than me and making me feel less than. Because we had an assignment where we were supposed to do a research project on a clip that we found, like a documentary, and I chose the 13th. And my professor was very unhappy with that. And I was trying to understand why they were unhappy with that. But I ended up getting a bad score, and the way that I reacted was like, okay, next time I'm going to take a different approach. Maybe my professor doesn't like what I was talking about in this moment, even though they may not understand the approach that I took. Maybe let me take a different route that they might like next time. And I think the next approach is like, I feel like I do this a lot where I'm always like, dignity, dignity, dignity. But I feel like there's moments where we push for a world of dignity, but we don't hold our friends accountable when they're being contemptuous. And it's the level of like, when you're throwing contempt at me or my loved ones, I will react. But when my loved ones throw contempt at you, I'm going to turn a blind eye. And I see that a lot right now, especially with politics and especially like with the presidential election and like with the current president and the new president coming in, the president elect, and the shift of that and the reactions that these two people are getting and the level that of contempt that they're both receiving, and how like people are choosing to like comment when it's beneficial to their loved ones, but are choosing to be quiet. And I see that with my friends on campus as well. Even though I've left the campus scene, I see like the stuff that they're posting, the stuff that they're tweeting back, and I see them being silent and being mute to their friends at times of contempt. So I think that's quite interesting.
So I want to follow up with that because your first thing that you said was that you felt contempt from a professor. And one of the questions I'm really curious about is, what do you think fuels this culture of contempt, this addiction? As you said, Arthur Brooks talks about in his book, David, Love Your Enemies, but he does talk about an addiction to contempt.
Yeah, and I think a nice quote that MLK uses, and we use this with our projects all the time in presentation, is the power of separation and like the limited understanding of different perspectives. And I think that's huge, especially because that steams a lot of high pressure, especially because that turns into contempt, because it limits understanding, especially when you're so separated away from those that you don't want to engage with, you know. And I think the dignity index pulls you closer to those that you want to be so separated from. So I think with teachers and like students and peers, like I feel like a limit of grace and understanding is crucial, especially for myself. I love the power of grace because I'm like, I'm not perfect. Sometimes I'll say something and I'm like, Ira, why would you say that? Why would you say that? So I think the limit of grace, and not the limit, but grace is crucial in moments of like this, because I think separation plays a huge effect into contempt and why contempt is so high.
Mm-hmm. I just want to chime in on this question that I'm curious about is, what is it that's fueling, if in fact there is a culture of contempt, and what is it that's fueling it these days?
The problems that we're facing in society are so complex that it's much easier to throw contempt at the other side than to try to use evidence to prove why your side is right. It's a lot easier to say they're wrong than to say I'm right and this is why, and I've put in the work, and I'm gonna use whatever persuasive skills are necessary to show you what I mean, and I'm gonna ask you to be a part of this with me. That is much harder than saying, well, you're wrong. So I would say that's what fuels contempt frequently, is that it's much easier. It gives you that spike of adrenaline. You tend to build your in-group because the minute that you say something fiery on social media, everyone who agrees with you is like, yeah, and then you're like, feel so seen. It's much less interesting to say, I don't agree with that. And like, no one watches that on TikTok, right? Like, those videos don't get a lot of views. The videos that get a lot of views are the angry person screaming at someone else. And because everyone picks a side and speaks about it in the comment section. But I'd say that, so it's fueled by that glorification of it, particularly through social media, but then also the complexity of the issues that we're facing and how it's so much easier just to be mad at somebody than to actually like have a discussion with them.
Yeah, it does have that benefit of getting accolades and support from people that think like you. And that's got to be self-reinforcing. It's like I got all these likes and oh, you go for it. You really nailed them. What I have found is I've in recent years sort of shifted more towards this idea of dignity is that by suspending judgment with someone that I've assumed thinks something uh, that I don't agree with or something I really dislike, is that I've tried approaching them with a sense of curiosity, genuine curiosity, not morbid curiosity, like how in the world could you possibly think that? But genuine curiosities. Tell me how you came to think that, and I want to understand you better. The more that I do that, and I've read so many stories, I've talked to people that do this, the more we do that, other people are much more likely to say, but I too have to admit I'm sort of stuck on this issue myself. But the more we challenge people, the more contemptuous we are, the more likely those other people are going to dig their heels in and really not admit to any questions that they might have about their own position. So what I found is by listening, by being curious, I often discover that what they think is not what I thought they think, that they too have some questions about it. And the other really cool thing that happens is that they sometimes become curious about what I think. And then that opens things up for a real discussion where we might come away and say, um, we're maybe not as far off as we thought we were, or this was really interesting. We're still way off, but I want to keep the conversation going, which if nothing else, it holds open the possibility that we might actually find compromise or that we can work together or we can set that aside if we're students or colleagues and actually get something done where we do agree. But let me open up. What are your thoughts about what's fueling this culture of contempt?
I agree with Alexa that it's way easier to respond with contempt than it is to take a step back and think about maybe seeing the good in the other side or values or interests that you might have. And it is important to listen and not just put people in a box. I've done that with family members and friends of like, oh, you voted this way or believe this, so I'm just going to put you in this box and I'm not curious about uh, anything else because you fit into this nice little box that I already have my preconceived notions about you. Um, but I really think contempt breeds contempt when our dignity is violated, then it's easy and almost justified, or feels like we can justify responding with contempt. And so it's just contempt, contempt, contempt. And somebody has to be the one to take a step back and be like, I am going to respond with dignity.
Here's a one other question I want to ask you. Then I'm going to ask one of you to describe the index because we've been talking about it and we want to get a little more clarity for our listeners about what it is. But I have to imagine that as you share what you're doing and maybe invite your fellow students to become part of this, or they say, "What is this organization you're a part of?" What do you say to those people who say, you're wanting me not to be contemptuous of people who do really horrible things, people who harm other people, whose views are bigoted or whatever they happen to be. You want me to treat them with dignity? They deserve to be treated with contempt. How, and I'm almost offended that you're asking me to treat them with dignity as if you're excusing what they're doing. Do you ever get that kind of response? And if so, what do you say?
I feel like I've gotten that response a lot. And I, my response has been, we're not asking people to back down from their convictions, passions, beliefs. We're not asking you to just make this a kumbaya, you know, whatever. But it's really, are we fighting fire with fire? That's not how you put out a fire. We don't use more fire. We use water and other agents to dilute the fire and the flames. And so that's been my response. If we can respond however we want. I mean, if it's a dangerous situation, maybe contempt is needed in that moment. But most of the time, we can take a step back and if we want to actually have a conversation with somebody, both people need to be treating the other side with dignity.
I think I agree with David because one thing that we do say is contempt is a response to a dignity violation. And I think in moments where somebody's hurting you so bad and you feel pain, I think that goes to a level 5. Like, I don't agree with you. I don't have to agree with you, but I do hear you. But then, like David did say, like, I feel like in moments like that, a response to contempt is never something that you could tell somebody when you're hurt, don't respond in contemptuous ways, but a push for dignity is always crucial to understand where the level of hurt came from and where did it stem from. So I think a level 5, like, okay, here's my stance, I hear you, but I don't agree with you. And there's not that level of engaging, but there's not that level of contempt back to the other side.
Yeah, there's a guy that I referenced in the podcast before. His name is Dylan Marin, and he promotes empathy. He has a book called Conversations with People Who Hate Me. And one of the lines in it, in his book that I really like, is that empathy is not endorsement. To do what you just said, Ira, I don't agree with you, but I'm going to listen to what your position is, doesn't mean in any way at all that you endorse what they're saying.
Correct. Yes.
But what you are saying is that I am regarding you as a human being with a person with dignity.
Yes.
Alexa, have you encountered this pushback at all to this idea that we ought to not be contemptuous of people whose ideas we might find really abhorrent?
Surprisingly, most people that I've talked to just get really excited about the index to varying levels of degree. The index acts as sort of a filter through which to process your thoughts. So, for example, that debate that I was talking about, I had thoughts and feelings about what people were saying. And I was able to say, oh, I feel frustrated right now because they are speaking at a level 3. And I feel that my dignity is being violated because they are speaking in a way that makes me feel othered and less than. And so my response, my automatic response is going to be respond with contempt as well. So you just knowing that I have the index kind of in my back pocket, I can just filter that and say, is that how I want to respond? Is that the best way to respond right now? And something that I imagine for students who might be listening, like, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist and I tend to take responsibility for things, but I also recognize it's not my responsibility to require that everyone in that room, in that debate, speak with dignity. People are going to use living in a culture of contempt. It's the dignity index and my participation in Students for Dignity gives me the tools to be able to respond, to have more control over my response so that I'm not sucked into this culture of contempt without any say. So there will be times that someone treats me with contempt and I just decide to let it go. I'm like, that's not a fight that I want to pick. And we're just gonna move on. Or there are times that I will call it out or I'll respond with dignity. And then there will be other times where I respond with contempt because it's natural. And but having the index and knowing this tool lets me choose instead of just falling into patterns that I've been taught.
I'm gathering from what you're saying is that the index, which we're going to talk about in just a moment more specifically, is a tool that helps you personally. It's not like you're out there evangelizing and saying, I'm going to try to convert everyone over to this, although I'm sure you're happy to talk about why it's been helpful to you. But there is this organization that's in the depolarizing space. It's called Starts With Us. And the whole point of Starts With Us is that this work to depolarize isn't about going around and telling other people how to be. It starts with us, as you said. It's a framework that helps you hear what you're saying and hear what your impulses are, and then to say, I don't have to choose to do what I feel like doing right now. I can do it differently. And if I do it differently, I'm going to be better off, and my relationships are going to be better off.
I agree with what everyone is saying. I personally, when I was talking to my peers, I had similar experience to Sid Alexa. Everyone seems super excited to practice this index and then apply it to their daily life. It was something that I was really touched by. But then I was thinking about times when, okay, when have I been in a situation where someone approached me with aggressive contempt, and I felt like I was in a situation where I was scared or I thought it was dangerous? I think in those situations, it might be best to just walk away or use some level of contempt. But at the same time, I was reminded of a person on my campus who likes to come and talk about, he's just a community member, and he comes to the campus and uses really hateful speech and talks about how these people are bad and you shouldn't be going out and all of this. And I saw some of the students there on my campus approach him with a level of dignity and said, "Why are you thinking this way?" And I think that's like the best level of dignity you can show. And I thought it was so interesting to see how the community member who was yelling at everyone immediately go quieter and then say, "Hey, here's what I was thinking." And then they said, "Okay, here is what I'm thinking." And then they just parted ways. And I thought that was just so interesting because obviously they're not people they're not the president, like global leaders creating policies for everyone. They're just community members and students. And so when they were able to just say, "Here are my experiences," I thought, wow, okay, they both got a deeper perspective.
Mm-hmm.
They both were able to analyze the other side more. And with that, they gained a little bit of knowledge, and then they also gained like this understanding of the people around them. And I think that's so important to creating unity or like making sure we're not hating each other.
Yeah, and if I think David said, contempt breeds contempt, and I think treating others with dignity can also breed a sense of dignity. Like, oh, that's how we're gonna talk. We can disagree, but we're not gonna uh, hold the other person in contempt and treat them without respect because they are a human being. And that can often change the tone. Maybe, Alexa, and that if some people had started off and said a few things like that in that debate that you had, the tone could have been shifted differently. And then you could have paused and said, what I'm hearing in this debate that is supposed to be an exchange of ideas is actually, it's becoming personal, contemptuous. That doesn't help any of us. And I recall from my conversation with Tim Shriver, who's of course helped co-create this index we're going to talk about in a minute, said, if you have contempt for other people, you make an enemy for your cause. And David, you referred to Arthur Brooks as this great book, Love Your Enemies. He said, the more contempt we have for them, the more them there will be. And so if we're really, truly concerned about our own cause and the things we care deeply about, the last thing we want to do is hold those people in contempt because they will just become often more extreme. They'll dig their heels and they won't hear anything we're saying. And that holds true with ourselves too. If we're contemptuous, is that we don't hear what people say. There's no opportunity for compromise or common understanding. And then, of course, if we're contemptuous, it breeds more contempt, and that doesn't bode well for any of us. Ira, and I want to say your whole name because I love your first name. You go by Ira, but it's Ira Dukunda. Is that right?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
Could you just for our listeners describe in general terms this dignity index and why it isn't just either you're treating people with dignity or you're treating them with contempt? Why is there a whole scale?
So one of the issues that we've identified is that you can't maximize what you can't measure in moments of conflicts and disagreement, but the dignity index does show you the measurements. So the dignity index is an 8-point scale that helps us measure what we do in moments when we disagree. Each point scale on the dignity index has a particular mindset and traits that we use towards the other sides in moments of conflicts and disagreements. One being they're not even human. It's our moral duty to destroy them before they destroy us. Being the most contemptuous and that has no ounce of dignity for the other side. And 8 being each one of us is born with inherent wealth and we treat everyone with dignity no matter what. Being the most dignity, seeing the inherent wealth in everyone. And 5 being the middle ground, where I hear what you say. I don't necessarily agree with you, but I do want to hear what you say, but I don't agree with you. There's no ounce of contempt. I say what I say, you say what you say, but we don't show no level of contempt. And I just want to note that the index is not used to score people, but instead to score the speech that we use. I cannot be a 2 and you cannot be a 7. We jumping up down the scale all the time with the language we do use each and every day. I think the dignity index is a tool to use as a mirror effect and not a tool to use as an attack mechanism. It's not an attack effect. You don't use it to attack other people, but yet to reflect on the speech that you do use to use in moments of disagreement.
Thank you for that. And for people listening out there that say, I want to learn more about Students for Dignity, Preston, what should they do? Where can they go?
You can find us on all social media platforms. Instagram, TikTok are kind of our main channels. Students for Dignity is the handle for that. To get in contact with us directly is studentsfordignity@unite.us. We have a wonderful team that's ready to respond to any interest, as well as these students. I mean, they're incredible. I'm glad we got to hear from all of them and they're doing the real work on campus, and so it's really exciting to hear them. So, and then you can also find us on our website, which is just dignity.us.
Okay, great. And if I'm listening and I'm at the University of Southern Florida or Penn State, I was thinking of Penn State watching a football game last night, or any community college, do you have chapters on campuses? And if someone was really interested, could they start one on their own campus?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have a handful of offerings where we help students that are interested, or faculty and administrators that are interested in bringing it to their campus. We have a lot of different offerings. Like you said, clubs and chapters are one of those big offerings. The students you heard from today are the leaders on their campus, and in a lot of ways starting chapters there. So yeah, definitely reach out to us. We have a team ready to respond to that. And just in general, we're willing to, our hope is just to bring it to campus and let it make the impact that you heard today from the students and their comments on campuses.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I want to thank all of you for being part of this Courageous Conversations. It's related to our school, so it's very relevant to what this podcast is about. I want to thank all of you. I also want to thank all of you for the great work you're doing in spreading the word about this, because I think in this increasingly polarized time we're living in, we have to do what David says. We have to throw water on it, not more fire. We have to find an antidote to this. And you as a group give me great hope and inspiration that this is taking hold among younger people. It's one thing for older folks like me to be talking about it with other older folks like me, but unless it starts germinating among young people and they say, this isn't working. We don't want a world where we have to, we don't want a world that is defined by contempt. We have to find a better way. That gives me great hope about the future of our country, our communities, what's going on in schools. So Thank you for that. If you want to find this and you're listening to this and wondering where you can find this episode, it's on schoolconversations.org, and there'll be some episode notes there you won't find elsewhere. But this episode and all of our episodes of Courageous Conversations appears on all of the major podcasting platforms, so you can find them there. And I hope that you will, if you listen to it and you like it, you will share it through social media with your friends and colleagues, particularly students you know that might enjoy listening to other students talk about a much better way forward than sometimes the direction we take. So with that, I'm going to thank you and say goodbye to everyone. So long.